Get ready for a revolutionary war story that will melt your heart. When a hardened Patriot captain discovers an enemy's orphaned daughter, he makes a choice that will change both their lives forever. This touching tale of found family proves that love knows no boundaries, even in the midst of war. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell for more emotional historical stories about courage, compassion, and the families we choose. The Captain's Stolen Heart. Chapter 1. After the Flames. Captain Ethan Blackwood rode through the smouldering remains of the Tory settlement with his jaw clenched so tightly his teeth ached, surveying the devastation his continental militia had wrought in the name of liberty and justice. The raid on Millfield had been strategically necessary. The settlement had been harbouring British sympathisers who were funneling supplies to Crown forces operating in western Pennsylvania. But necessity, Ethan was learning, didn't make the aftermath any easier to witness. The October wind carried the acrid smell of burned wood and something else, something sweet and terrible that spoke of lives lost and futures destroyed. Most of the buildings had been reduced to charred timber and ash, their contents scattered across the muddy ground like the broken dreams of families who had chosen the wrong side in a war that showed mercy to no one. Ethan's orders had been clear. Destroy the settlement's ability to support British operations, confiscate any weapons or supplies, and ensure that Millfield could no longer serve as a staging point for Tory raids against Patriot communities. His men had followed those orders with the grim efficiency of soldiers who had seen too many of their own friends killed by Loyalist militia operating from supposedly neutral settlements. But efficiency in war often meant brutality, and Ethan found himself questioning whether the victory they had achieved was worth the price paid by civilian families whose only crime had been choosing loyalty to the Crown over rebellion against it. "Sir," Sergeant Murphy called from near the ruins of what had been the settlement's largest house, "you need to see this." Ethan dismounted and walked carefully through the debris, his boots crunching on broken glass and scattered household items that told stories of interrupted lives. Children's toys lay abandoned in the mud beside cooking pots and fragments of family portraits, each item representing dreams and hopes that had been consumed along with the buildings that had housed them. Murphy was standing beside a partially collapsed root cellar, its wooden doors thrown back to reveal stone steps descending into darkness. "We found her down there," the sergeant said quietly, gesturing toward a bundle of torn fabric that Ethan initially mistook for discarded clothing. As his eyes adjusted to the shadows, Ethan realized the bundle was actually a young girl, perhaps 11 or 12 years old, curled into a tight ball against the cellar's stone wall. Her dress was torn and stained with soot, her dark hair matted with dirt and what looked like dried blood. But it was her eyes that stopped Ethan cold, wide with terror and pain, staring at him with the hollow gaze of someone who had seen too much suffering for her young mind to process. "Is she injured?" Ethan asked, kneeling carefully at the cellar entrance to avoid startling the child further. "Hard to say," Murphy replied. "She hasn't spoken since we found her. Won't let any of us get close enough for a proper examination. But there's blood on her dress, and she's favoring her left arm like it might be broken." Ethan studied the girl's pale face, seeing beyond the grime and terror to features that spoke of gentle upbringing and careful education. This wasn't the child of servants or labourers, but someone who had been raised with privileges that war had brutally stripped away. Her expensive dress, though now ruined, suggested a family of means, while her refined features indicated good breeding and comfortable circumstances that no longer existed. "Where are her parents?" Ethan asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Best we can determine, her father was Marcus Whitmore, the settlement's leader. Found his body in the main house along with a woman we assume was his wife. Murphy's voice carried the flat tone soldiers used when discussing casualties that couldn't be changed. Looks like they tried to defend their home when the shooting started. The name Whitmore struck Ethan like a physical blow. He had known Marcus Whitmore before the war, had even considered him a friend during the years when political differences seemed like abstract disagreements rather than causes for which men killed and died. Whitmore had been a merchant of intelligence and principle, someone who genuinely believed that reconciliation with Britain offered the best hope for colonial prosperity and peace. The realization that he had just orphaned the daughter of a man he had once respected created a knot of guilt and regret in Ethan's chest that threatened to overwhelm his carefully maintained military composure. This wasn't how war was supposed to work, at least not in the idealistic vision that had motivated him to take up arms against Crown authority. Soldiers were supposed to fight soldiers, with civilians remaining safely removed from the violence that settled political disputes. "What's your name?" Ethan asked gently, directing his question toward the terrified child, who continued to regard him with the wary attention of a wounded animal. The girl didn't respond, but her eyes tracked his movements with intelligent assessment that suggested she understood his words, even if she chose not to reply. There was something in her gaze that reminded Ethan of his own daughter, lost to fever 3 years earlier, along with his wife, during the harsh winter that had claimed so many colonial families. "My name is Captain Blackwood," Ethan continued, keeping his voice soft and non-threatening. "I know you're scared and I know you're hurt, but I want to help you if you'll let me." Still no verbal response, but the girl's posture shifted slightly, suggesting she was listening even if trust remained beyond her current capabilities. Ethan found himself studying her features more carefully, noting the intelligence in her eyes and the quiet dignity with which she bore her terror and pain. Despite her youth and obvious trauma, there was something unbroken in her spirit that called to his protective instincts. "Sir," Murphy said quietly, "what do you want to do with her? We can't leave her here, but taking a Tory child back to camp." He didn't finish the sentence, but Ethan understood the implications. His men might accept housing an enemy's daughter, but other Patriot forces would view such mercy as suspicious at best and treasonous at worst. Ethan considered the options available, none of which seemed adequate to the moral complexity of the situation. He could arrange for the girl to be transported to British lines, where her Loyalist connections might provide some protection. He could seek colonial families willing to take in an orphaned enemy child, though such generosity was rare in wartime. Or he could simply leave her to whatever fate awaited unprotected children in a landscape devastated by military action. All of these alternatives felt like additional betrayals of principles that had motivated his involvement in the fight for independence. The cause he served was supposed to represent justice, liberty, and the protection of innocent people from tyrannical authority. Abandoning a traumatized child because of her parents' political beliefs seemed like exactly the kind of arbitrary cruelty the revolution was meant to oppose. "Help me get her out of there," Ethan said finally, making a decision that would complicate his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Murphy looked skeptical. "Sir, are you certain that's wise? Taking responsibility for a Tory orphan could raise questions about your own loyalties, especially if word reaches the wrong ears." "Let me worry about my loyalties," Ethan replied firmly. "Right now, I'm worried about a frightened child who needs medical attention and protection." Working together, they coaxed the girl from the cellar with patience and gentle encouragement. She moved slowly and obviously painfully, confirming Murphy's assessment that she had sustained injuries during the raid. Her left arm was indeed broken, and there were cuts and bruises that suggested she had been caught in the violence that claimed her parents. As they lifted her from the cellar into the grey afternoon light, Ethan got his first clear look at her face. Despite the dirt and trauma, she was beautiful in the way that promised even greater beauty in adulthood. Delicate features, expressive eyes, and an air of quiet strength that had somehow survived the destruction of everything familiar in her world. "Can you tell me your name?" Ethan asked again, as he cradled her carefully in his arms, mindful of her injured arm. This time, the girl's lips moved slightly, forming words so quietly he had to strain to hear them. "Lily," she whispered. "Lily Whitmore." The sound of her own voice seemed to surprise her, as if she hadn't been certain she was still capable of speech after witnessing horrors that would have challenged adult comprehension. But speaking her name also seemed to trigger fresh grief, and tears began to stream down her dirty cheeks as the reality of her situation reasserted itself. "Well, Miss Lily Whitmore," Ethan said gently, "I'm going to take you somewhere safe, where we can tend to your injuries and figure out what comes next. Would that be acceptable to you?" Lily nodded slightly, her small hand gripping his uniform coat with desperate strength that spoke of her need for any anchor in a world that had suddenly become unpredictable and dangerous. The gesture created an unexpected tightness in Ethan's chest, awakening protective instincts that had lain dormant since his own daughter's death. As he carried Lily toward his horse, Ethan found himself making silent promises that he knew might prove impossible to keep. He would protect her from further harm, ensure she received proper medical care, and find some way to provide the stability and security that every child deserved, regardless of their parents' political affiliations. Subscribe for the next chapter of this Revolutionary War family drama. Will Ethan be able to protect Lily from those who see her only as the enemy's child? Click the notification bell so you never miss our heartwarming historical stories about love and family forged in the crucible of war. Chapter 2. The Reluctant Father. The Continental Army camp outside of Lancaster buzzed with the controlled chaos of soldiers preparing for winter quarters, but Ethan barely noticed the familiar sounds of military life as he carried Lily Whitmore toward the medical tent. Her slight weight in his arms felt simultaneously fragile and precious, a responsibility he had accepted impulsively, but now realized would require careful planning to execute successfully. Dr. Samuel Hayes looked up from his surgical instruments with the weary expression of a man who had seen too much suffering and too little healing during his months serving the Patriot cause. His eyebrows rose in surprise when he saw Ethan approach with a child in his arms, particularly a child whose expensive dress and refined features clearly marked her as coming from Loyalist society. "Captain," Dr. Hayes said carefully, "what exactly have we here?" "A patient who needs your attention," Ethan replied firmly, settling Lily onto the examination table with gentle precision. "Her left arm appears to be broken, and she has various cuts and bruises that need proper cleaning and treatment." Dr. Hayes began his examination with professional competence, but Ethan could see questions forming in the physician's eyes as he noted details about Lily's clothing, demeanor, and obvious social background. The Continental Army treated injured civilians when circumstances permitted, but enemy civilians, particularly children of known Loyalist leaders, presented complications that most officers preferred to avoid. "Miss," Dr. Hayes said gently to Lily, "I'm going to examine your arm to determine the extent of the injury. I'll try not to cause additional pain, but you must tell me if anything I do makes you uncomfortable." Lily nodded silently, her large eyes fixed on the doctor's face with the intense attention of someone trying to assess whether this new adult could be trusted. She had spoken only once since Ethan found her, and he suspected that trust would be earned slowly and carefully by people willing to demonstrate genuine concern for her welfare. As Dr. Hayes worked, Ethan found himself studying Lily's face more closely, noting details that had been obscured by dirt and trauma during their initial encounter. She possessed the kind of delicate beauty that would mature into genuine elegance. But more importantly, there was an intelligence in her expressions that suggested she understood far more about her situation than her youth might indicate. "The arm is definitely broken, Doctor," Hayes confirmed after completing his examination. "Clean break, fortunately, which should heal properly with appropriate care and immobilization. The cuts are superficial and will respond well to cleaning and bandaging. But, Captain—" The doctor paused, glancing meaningfully toward Lily, before continuing in a lower voice. "Perhaps we should discuss the broader implications of this situation privately." Ethan nodded, understanding the need for discretion. "Lily," he said, addressing the girl directly, "Dr. Hayes is going to set your arm and bandage your injuries. It will hurt for a moment, but then you'll feel much better. Can you be brave for just a little longer?" "Yes, sir," Lily replied quietly, her voice carrying the careful politeness of a child who had been well raised, but no longer knew what was expected of her in this strange new world. While Dr. Hayes prepared his materials for setting the broken bone, Ethan stepped outside the medical tent to consider the challenges that lay ahead. Taking responsibility for Lily had been an instinctive response to immediate need, but actually caring for her would require navigating military regulations, social prejudices, and practical complications that could easily prove overwhelming. His men were already talking among themselves about the Tory girl their captain had rescued, their conversations carrying a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and barely concealed concern about the wisdom of harboring an enemy's child. Sergeant Murphy approached with the careful expression of a veteran soldier preparing to offer unwelcome but necessary advice. "Sir," Murphy began diplomatically, "the men are wondering about your plans for the girl. They respect your decision to provide medical attention, but there are concerns about longer-term arrangements." "What kind of concerns?" "Practical concerns, mostly. We're heading into winter quarters where supplies will be limited and space even more so. Taking care of a child, especially a Loyalist child, could create complications with other units who might question our priorities." Murphy paused, studying Ethan's expression. "There are also questions about what happens when word of this reaches higher command." Ethan had been anticipating such challenges, but hearing them articulated made the obstacles seem more daunting. Military life was difficult enough without adding the complications of childcare, and his superiors would certainly question the wisdom of diverting resources to benefit the daughter of a known enemy. "What do you think I should do, Murphy?" Ethan asked, genuinely curious about his sergeant's assessment of the situation. "Honestly, sir, I think you should find a colonial family willing to take her in and wash your hands of the whole business before it causes problems for you and the men." Murphy's voice carried pragmatic wisdom born of years navigating military bureaucracy. "I understand the impulse to help, but this girl represents complications we don't need during winter quarters." Before Ethan could respond, Dr. Hayes emerged from the medical tent with an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with personal concern. "The arm is set and should heal properly with rest and proper care. I've given her something for the pain, which means she'll likely sleep for several hours." "How long before she's fully recovered?" 6 weeks for the bone to heal completely, though she'll need careful monitoring to ensure proper alignment is maintained." Dr. Hayes paused, studying Ethan's face. "Captain, I hope you don't mind my asking, but what exactly are your plans for this child?" It was the same question Murphy had raised, and one that Ethan still didn't have a satisfactory answer for. Taking Lily had been an emotional response to an impossible situation, but keeping her would require rational planning and careful consideration of consequences that extended far beyond his personal feelings. "I'm not entirely certain," Ethan admitted honestly. but I know I can't abandon her to whatever fate awaits unprotected children in a war zone." Dr. Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "She's been through tremendous trauma, losing her parents, witnessing violence, sustaining injuries that could have been fatal under different circumstances. Recovery will require not just medical healing, but emotional stability and consistent care from people she learns to trust." The physician's assessment reinforced Ethan's growing conviction that Lily needed more than temporary assistance. She needed the kind of sustained support and protection that could only come from someone willing to accept long-term responsibility for her welfare. The realization was both daunting and strangely appealing, awakening parental instincts that had lain dormant since his own daughter's death. "Dr. Hayes," Ethan said slowly, "if I were to take permanent responsibility for her care, what would that involve from a medical standpoint?" "Permanent responsibility?" The doctor's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Captain, are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "I'm exploring possibilities," Ethan replied carefully. "Hypothetically speaking, what would be required to ensure her proper care and development?" Dr. Hayes considered this for a long moment. "Well, she would need regular medical monitoring, proper nutrition, education appropriate to her social background, and most importantly, emotional security from adults willing to provide consistent care and affection." He paused, studying Ethan's expression. "Those are significant commitments, Captain, particularly for a man with military obligations that could take him away from such responsibilities at any time." The challenges were real and substantial, but so was the growing conviction that abandoning Lily would represent a betrayal of the principles that had motivated his service to the Patriot cause. If the revolution was about protecting innocent people from arbitrary authority, then protecting one innocent child from the consequences of war seemed like the most fundamental expression of those values. "Murphy," Ethan said, turning to his sergeant, "I want you to gather the men for a company meeting after evening mess. There are some things we need to discuss about our mission and our responsibilities." Murphy's expression suggested he suspected what those discussions might involve, but military discipline prevented him from questioning his captain's decisions directly. "Yes, sir. Anything else?" "Yes," Ethan replied, his voice carrying new resolve. "Send word to Colonel Harrison that I need to speak with him privately at his earliest convenience. There's a matter of some importance I need to discuss with him." As his sergeant departed to carry out these orders, Ethan returned to the medical tent, where Lily lay sleeping under the influence of Dr. Hayes's pain medication. In sleep, her face had lost some of its wariness and fear, revealing the innocent beauty that trauma had temporarily obscured. She looked remarkably like his own daughter had at that age, awakening memories that were both painful and precious. Standing beside her makeshift bed, Ethan found himself making a decision that would change both their lives in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Whatever obstacles lay ahead, military regulations, social prejudices, practical complications, he would find ways to overcome them. Lily Whitmore had lost everything in the violence that claimed her parents and destroyed her home. But she would gain a father who would protect her with the same determination he brought to serving the cause of American independence. Don't miss the next chapter. Will Ethan's fellow officers accept his decision to adopt the enemy's child? What challenges await as he tries to balance fatherhood with military duty? Subscribe now and hit the bell icon for more Revolutionary War family drama that shows how love can triumph over the deepest divisions. Chapter 3. A Father's Declaration. The meeting with Colonel Harrison took place in the command tent 3 hours after evening mess. With the autumn wind rattling the canvas walls and the distant sounds of camp life providing a backdrop to what Ethan knew would be one of the most important conversations of his military career. Harrison was a fair man, but also a practical one. someone who measured every decision against its potential impact on military effectiveness and unit morale. "Captain Blackwood," Harrison began without preamble, "I understand you've taken in a Loyalist child from yesterday's raid. My officers are divided about whether this represents commendable mercy or questionable judgment. I'd like to hear your perspective before forming my own opinion." Ethan had spent the afternoon preparing for this conversation, weighing arguments and anticipating objections. But he found himself setting aside his carefully planned rhetoric in favor of simple honesty. "Sir, I found an orphaned child who had been severely injured and traumatized. Military considerations aside, I couldn't leave her to die or suffer further harm." "Noble sentiments," Harrison acknowledged, "but we're fighting a war, Captain, not running an orphanage. Every resource we devote to caring for enemy civilians is a resource unavailable for military operations. How do you justify that allocation to soldiers who are already making significant sacrifices?" It was the practical challenge Ethan had expected, and one that went to the heart of his decision to accept responsibility for Lily's care. Military resources were indeed limited, and every mouth to feed represented a burden on supplies that could otherwise support combat operations. "With respect, sir, I'm not asking the Continental Army to care for her," Ethan replied carefully. "I'm prepared to accept personal responsibility for her support and welfare, my own salary, my own provisions, my own time and attention. The Army's only involvement would be permitting her to remain with our unit during winter quarters." Harrison leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan's expression with the assessment of an experienced officer evaluating subordinates' motivations and capabilities. "Personal responsibility is an admirable concept, Captain, but what happens when military duties require your absence? Who cares for her during combat operations or extended campaigns?" "I'll make appropriate arrangements as circumstances require," Ethan said, though he admitted privately that he hadn't fully worked out such details. "There are Army wives who accompany our forces, and I'm confident I can establish support networks to ensure her continued care." "Army wives caring for the daughter of a known Loyalist leader," Harrison observed dryly. "That should prove interesting from a social dynamic standpoint." The colonel rose and walked to the tent's entrance, gazing out at the camp where hundreds of soldiers were settling into their evening routines. When he spoke again, his voice carried a thoughtful tone that suggested he was wrestling with competing considerations. "Captain, I'm going to be direct with you about the challenges this decision creates. Some of our officers view mercy toward Loyalist civilians as evidence of insufficient commitment to the Patriot cause. Others worry that caring for enemy children sets precedents that could overwhelm our logistical capabilities. And there are men who lost family members to Loyalist raids who might resent resources being devoted to the daughter of their enemies." Each concern Harrison raised was legitimate, and Ethan found himself acknowledging the validity of objections he had hoped to dismiss as narrow-minded prejudice. The decision to protect Lily did create complications that extended far beyond his personal situation. "I understand those concerns, sir," Ethan replied, "but I also believe the principles we're fighting for include protecting innocent people from the arbitrary exercise of power. If we abandon those principles when they become inconvenient, what exactly are we fighting to achieve?" Harrison turned back to face him, a slight smile crossing his weathered features. "Spoken like the idealistic young officer I remember from our early campaigns. Though I notice you've learned to frame moral arguments in political terms that are harder to dismiss." "Experience has taught me the value of practical rhetoric," Ethan admitted, "but the underlying conviction remains unchanged. We're supposed to be better than our enemies, sir. That means accepting responsibilities that might not serve immediate military interests." The colonel returned to his chair, his expression growing more serious. "Very well, Captain. I'm prepared to approve your request on several conditions. First, the child's presence must not interfere with your military duties in any way. Second, any problems her presence creates within the unit will be resolved immediately, regardless of personal preferences. Third, you will accept complete personal responsibility for her behavior, education, and welfare. Relief flooded through Ethan as he realized Harrison was willing to permit the arrangement, though the conditions were exactly what he had expected. "Thank you, sir. I accept those terms completely." "There's one more thing," Harrison continued. "The girl's identity creates ongoing security concerns. The daughter of Marcus Whitmore could become a target for retaliation by patriots who view her as a symbol of Loyalist resistance, or she could become a propaganda tool for British forces who want to portray us as child killers. I need your assurance that you've considered such possibilities." The security implications were indeed troubling, and ones that Ethan hadn't fully appreciated during his emotional response to finding an orphaned child. Lily's parentage made her both a potential victim and a potential asset in the broader propaganda war that accompanied military conflicts. "I'll take appropriate precautions," Ethan promised. "And if circumstances require relocating her for safety reasons, you'll notify me immediately and follow whatever orders I deem necessary for unit security," Harrison finished firmly. "This arrangement continues only as long as it serves broader military interests." After leaving the command tent, Ethan walked slowly through the camp toward the medical area where Lily remained under Dr. Hayes's care. The evening air carried the sounds and scents of army life, cooking fires, quiet conversations, and the routine activities of men preparing for sleep after long days of military duty. He found Lily awake but groggy from medication, her injured arm properly splinted and her other wounds cleaned and bandaged. Dr. Hayes had also provided clean clothing that, while obviously borrowed from camp followers, fit reasonably well and restored some measure of dignity to her appearance. "How are you feeling?" Ethan asked gently, settling beside her makeshift bed. "Better," Lily replied quietly, her voice carrying the careful politeness he was beginning to recognize as characteristic. "Thank you for helping me." And the simple gratitude in her words created an unexpected tightness in Ethan's chest. This child had lost everything: parents, home, security, future. Yet she still possessed the emotional generosity to express appreciation for kindness from strangers. "Lily," Ethan said carefully, "I need to discuss some things with you about what happens next. You're welcome to stay with me and my men for as long as necessary, but that means living in a military camp surrounded by soldiers who are fighting against the cause your parents supported." Lily's expression grew troubled as she considered the implications of what he was saying. "Will they hurt me because of what my parents believed?" "Not while I'm protecting you," Ethan replied firmly. "But it does mean you'll be living among people who view your family as enemies. That might be difficult sometimes." "My parents are dead," Lily said with startling directness. "Whatever they believed died with them. I just want to be safe and not hurt anymore." The matter-of-fact way she spoke about her parents' death suggested she was beginning to process the trauma that had shattered her world. But it also revealed a pragmatic intelligence that had already assessed her situation and recognized the necessity of adapting to new circumstances. "Would you like to stay with me?" Ethan asked. "It would mean living like a soldier's daughter, following the army during campaigns, sharing whatever hardships we face together." Lily studied his face with the serious attention of someone making a decision she understood would shape her future. "Would you really want me, even though my father was your enemy?" "I would want you because you're a brave, intelligent young lady who deserves protection and care," Ethan replied honestly. "Your parents' politics have nothing to do with your value as a person." For the first time since he had found her, Lily smiled, a tentative expression that transformed her serious features into something approaching the happiness that should characterize childhood, then yes, I would like to stay with you. In that case, Ethan said, feeling a warmth spread through his chest that he hadn't experienced since his own daughter's death, I suppose we should make this arrangement official. Would you be willing to be my daughter, Lily Blackwood? The new name seemed to surprise her, but after a moment of consideration she nodded solemnly. I would like that very much, Father. The word felt both strange and wonderful on her lips, carrying implications that would reshape both their lives in ways neither could yet imagine. But as Ethan looked at this remarkable child who had chosen to trust him with her future, he felt certain they could face whatever challenges lay ahead together. Subscribe for more Revolutionary War family stories. Will Lily find happiness as a soldier's daughter? How will their bond grow stronger through the trials ahead? Hit the notification bell for heartwarming historical tales that prove family is about love, not blood.